Let's have that climate discussion. Rueanna Haynes joins me, and she is the director of the Climate Analytics Caribbean. And she, of course, just came back from that hectic, I would say, whirlwind Egypt conference and discussions and dialogue. We were getting lots of updates from Ryan and from Colleen, so we were very much in the loop. And I know one of the major concerns and what was, I guess you could confirm with me, I never really found out if it was rectified, was that loss and damage fund. But before we get to all of that, compliments, welcome back, and great to have you on the show.
Thank you so much, Jason. It's good to be here.
Just walk me through, getting there, what was the first order of business when you got to Egypt?
The first order of business in Egypt is the set of preparatory meetings that we have to do before the actual conference begins. So the conference itself is 2 weeks. Before it officially starts, we have preparatory meetings where we sit in our negotiating groups and prepare ourselves to engage in the discussions.
And who you're engaging with, who you're talking to, who you're bringing these concerns to?
Well, we sit as island states, first of all, and we make sure that we are all on the same page because we negotiate as one bloc. After that, we start to engage with everybody else, the whole wide world. So the European Union, they engage as a bloc. The United States, they engage as themselves, but also in the context of a group called the Umbrella Group and other developing countries as part of the broader developing country bloc.
So when you talk about island states, we're talking small island states like the Caribbean, we're talking here Bali, Fiji, Tuvalu, these places?
Not Bali.
Not so much Bali?
Not Bali. We're talking small island developing states who are also members of the Alliance of Small Island States, or AOSIS.
You can probably give me a couple of countries?
Sure. So it's 39 independent countries. So it's all of the Caribbean community.
Yes.
So all of us in the English-speaking Caribbean community plus Haiti, as well as low-lying coastal states such as Belize and Guyana.
Okay.
Then it's the islands in the Pacific. So the Marshall Islands, Tuvalu, Fiji, Palau.
Palau, yeah, I see them in the Olympics every time. I say, hey, look, Palau. You know, I look forward to Palau every Olympics. Yeah.
And then you also have the islands in the Atlantic and China Seas. You have Singapore, you have the Maldives, you have the Seychelles, you have Mauritius. So it's quite a large group, and it's made up of both, you know, independent as well as non-independent territories. So for example, you have the Cook Islands, which is not an independent territory, but they are a member of the Alliance of Small Island States, and you also have observer countries as well.
What about like the Falkland Islands to the top of Argentina, or to the bottom of Argentina?
Not members.
Wow, so they still have certain islands just not taken part. I guess too, they're particular, I think they're under the British, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, that's disputed.
Well, yeah, well, yeah, we'll get into that. That's geopolitical discussion.
That's geopolitical.
But we're talking here now, okay, you settle up, make sure we're on the same page. My real concern really, and I was saying it all the time when the reports were coming in from Ryan and from Colleen, I trust and I hope this is not really a talk shop. This is not just a chance for people to go and yes, you vent, you express your concerns. Is there meaningful action? Did you see tangible decisions, meaningful action coming out of this that can impact all of us?
Definitely, definitely. I would say, you know, this is one of the most meaningful COPs that we've had in a while. For context,
but tough at the same time.
But tough at the same time. One of the toughest. I've been to about 12 so far. We've been negotiating on climate change in the Global Forum for the past 30 years. And loss and damage is one of those issues that was raised at the very beginning by those same small island developing states. So 30 years ago, this issue of loss and damage, this issue of financing for loss and damage was raised. We're here now in 2022, we finally have a loss and damage fund. But with that, I will say it is a landmark, groundbreaking decision. It wasn't clear at the beginning of this COP whether we would even get there. In June, because we have negotiations throughout the year, in June, a colleague of mine from a large developed country that I will not name turned to me and said that we will get a loss and damage fund over his dead body. I'm happy to report that he's still alive, and we do have the fund.
Wow.
But it has been a quite difficult discussion.
That's the kind of arguments that that's the kind of words people come with?
Not on the floor officially, but definitely in side room discussions, yes.
And I would imagine nobody will want to pay up, but when we really consider what these bigger countries do based on their industry and their output that's clearly impacting the climate, and we know on the receiving end of these rising sea levels, yes, somebody will have to compensate. Who are some of these countries? Who are some of the entities that will have to now put things in place and take money out their coffers to assist?
Yet to be decided, Jason.
Wow.
So So a few things in relation to this. The entire reason that we've had such a difficult time getting loss and damage financing on the agenda is that large industrialized countries saw this as some type of basis or admission of liability on their part. They didn't even want to entertain the discussion because they did not want it to be interpreted as an admission of liability on their part. And this is because in the global discussion, within the global framework, it's those countries that have the responsibility to provide climate financing for developing countries to be able to deal with climate change.
You know, this discussion, it's coming even closer to home. And I'm glad that, you know, we started in Egypt, but I want to pivot to Trinidad and Tobago for a bit before we head back outside with the discussions. We saw recently that November was the wettest in recorded history. We saw the impact in Bamboo number 2, Mayaro, the road's still very much in a shambles. Is that a direct result of, you believe, global warming and just severe weather impacts, or that just you feel, based on your research being in the field, what was your understanding of that particular weather event?
Well, let me caveat this by saying I'm not a scientist. However, what we do know is a few things. First of all, we are already experiencing global warming, right? We are already 1.1 to 1.2 degrees above the average warming in pre-industrial times. That's the baseline that we use, pre-industrial times, right? To put that into context, as small island developing states, we are saying that we cannot go beyond 1.5 degrees of warming above pre-industrial times. We're already at 1.1, 1.2. So we know that global warming and the impacts of global warming are already happening. We know that for this region, those impacts are going to most likely involve more frequent, more extreme weather events. We know that it's also going to involve a certain level of sea level rise. We know that it involves ocean acidification, which is going to have a negative impact on ecosystems such as coral reefs. So all of these things have already begun to happen. As to the degree to which the rainfall, the excessive rainfall that we experienced in November can be attributed to climate change, that has yet to be seen, but there's definitely a part of it that would have been playing a role in the context of global warming.
Do you think it's time for us to have the bigger conversation in terms of infrastructure and building to adapt with the environment? Because we have seen countries in Europe, those countries that, you know, have lots of canals and water. We've seen Venice and how these people adjust to a place that is always, in terms of the fluctuation of the water. Or should people just move away from these coastlines and we try to, you know, because for some reason, every single year it seems to happen, or every other year certain areas are prone to flooding and it's just getting worse and worse. What would be your advice in that regard? Well,
adaptation is something that I know is very high on the agenda of most governments, including our own, when it comes to responding to climate change. The thing with adaptation is that you need to have a certain level of technology in place in order to understand where exactly the impacts are going to be happening the worst, and then you need to plan from that basis to understand what type of response, because there are many countries that are already taking adaptation action, but some of it is actually maladaptation. So sometimes you build a seawall to deal with sea level rise, and then the seawall causes the coast to erode even more than it was eroding before, even faster. So adaptation is a very, very expensive, very, very technical, and, you know, it's something that needs to be approached with a certain level of care, and it takes time.
You know, I've seen erosion in my lifetime. I spent my formative years in South in Erin, and we used to go to Lucero Beach to bathe and and when I went to Lucero recently, it was not what I remembered. The coastline, it come more or less into like close to the road. The beach house, I remember we used to spend family time, you know, it's more or less gone.
Yeah.
I was in shock, but jaw dropped, you know. I could not believe it. It's real. And there are people who still doubt this climate change argument, you know.
Well, people will believe, you know, what their eyes can see. And people will ascribe reasons to things based on their own level of understanding. But that's also part of the mission in terms of my work. And what we do at Climate Analytics Caribbean is we try to educate people about what's happening. We try to support governments, our own in Trinidad and Tobago, but also throughout the region, as well as other small island states, in being able to participate in the global climate discussion, providing advice, providing support, providing education.
Let's go back to Egypt. Would you say it was worth it this time around? You said you went a couple before. Was this one, you would say, the most impactful, the most successful?
I wouldn't say it was the most successful. I would say that it is a landmark COP. It was definitely worth it. It was an extraordinarily challenging COP. I mean, the geopolitical situation that we're in is very grim for climate, with a war going on, with an energy crisis happening, with a food crisis happening.
And with Russia weaponizing winter in Ukraine, that is truly unfortunate.
Right, and you know, we see globally, we see governments that have been at the forefront of the green revolution stepping back into coal in particular, which is, you know, the most polluting fossil fuel there is. And so we went into this COP in a global situation that, you know, really did not set us up for success. And we managed to leave with some success. So for that reason, it really was a landmark COP, and this loss and damage fund gives us some hope for the future.
Yeah. Do emotions run high in these meetings? Just give me the mood of what happens inside the room when the doors are closed. What's his voice? Is it passionate? Is it that, you know, shouting across the floor like we see in Parliament, or is it just somebody present and then they respond? I just want to get a little sense, like if I was a fly on the wall in that meeting, what would I see?
It depends on which meeting you're in. So in conferences, first of all, there are, you know, several agenda items. There's 3 different bodies that are meeting at the same time. So you have the most formal meeting where ministers are. Tensions can run high, but that tends to be the most formal meeting. So the ministers come, they prepare a statement, they give their statement, and they listen to others. Then you have a level below, where it's the ambassadors that are meeting. That tends to be a bit more informal. You might get some responses taking place, but then you also have informal meetings that are happening with delegates at a technical level, where, you know, a lot of the times we end up away from our desks in a huddle, exchanging, I will say, back and forth with each other, and you do see tensions running high in that context. Sometimes that context, though, also ends up on screen, which has happened several times in the past. Sometimes that happens, you know, even in the formal meetings where the media, where it's lights, camera, action, and you have countries arguing with each other on the floor.
You know, on a personal note, what you're doing, you know, in terms of your particular role and function as a climate analytics person, you know, director in that regard, you feel a sense of purpose, a sense of that you're making a difference?
I would like to hope so. I've dedicated my entire professional career to this work. In that time, we have seen some success, some wins. Around the 1.5 issue, for example. In 2009, everybody was talking about 2 degrees Celsius. And, you know, over the years, through advocacy of smaller and developing states, and I was a part of that, we now have brought the global community on board with 1.5 degrees Celsius as the limit for global warming. As to whether or not it might be too late is a different issue, but they are there. So I have seen some success. I do have reason for hope, and I hope to continue doing this work.
You know, I just want to touch on something really quick before we take the break. We have seen, especially in those islands that pride themselves with the sea and the sun and the coastline, where the seaweed scenario, it's really caused a major impact in many of the all-inclusives. I was in an all-inclusive this year in Antigua, and they had about 2 men with wheelbarrow having to rake it up, and I mean, real back-breaking work.
Yeah.
Seen it. I can't remember growing up seeing that. What's causing that, and could that be reversed?
Well, definitely a part of what's linked to it is the actual temperature.
What the temperature causing it?
The temperature of the ocean itself and the warming of the ocean itself, that's making those environments more and more suitable for the development of the seaweed. So seaweed has always been a part of things, but the way it's happening now, it's definitely linked to this whole climate change phenomenon.
Yeah, and people can't doubt it because we have been seeing these things, you know, in real time. I mean, I can recall seeing all that sort of seaweed on any kind of coastline as a child. And you know, the funny thing is, I don't know if it's because of youthful exuberance. We as children used to run around in our sun whole day, we playing, riding bike. Sometimes that sun now, a couple of minutes here, you feel drained. So yeah, it's here, and we have to obviously continue with the dialogue. And people like Rueanna, they're doing their part with your team to ensure that, you know, there is meaningful action behind some of these talks so we could, of course, bend the corner and save the planet, ultimately. Because if we don't do it, you see the children, and their children will not forgive us, huh? They will say, see them, they had a chance, and they drop the ball. Rueanna, all the best compliments of the season.
I have one plug to make, Jason.
Go right ahead.
So on this Wednesday, Climate Analytics Caribbean is going to be having an event where we take a deep dive into the outcomes of COP27.
Excellent.
It's starting at 6 p.m.
Where?
It's going to be at Meal Fleur around the Savannah.
Oh, nice.
Yes, and we also hope to live stream. So please do follow us at Climate Analytics on Twitter. We're also on LinkedIn for further information about how you can either join, register, or join online.
Well said. Wednesday,
6 p.m.
6 p.m.
Yes.
Around the Queen's Park, Savannah, Millflow. We, of course, segue from the climate discussion, and we talk about Woodbrook, where actually, in the same Millflow, we went a couple weeks ago, I was able to see this book that they did this launch for at that same venue. Let's talk about Woodbrook and talk about that amazing book. That's up next.